Cashflow Diary Podcast, episode 16.
Congratulations, you showed up. Give yourself a high five in celebration of your success. Welcome to the Cashflow Diary, where new and experienced investors come to take confident action towards their goals. Your host is a family man, a real estate entrepreneur, investor, coach, and instructor. As a master facilitator of Robert Kiyosaki's Cashflow 101 game, he's inspired many to begin their journey into creating cash flow for themselves and their family. And now, here he is to offer you the tools required to earn the income desired. Your cash flow coach, Jay Massey.
Well, hello there. Welcome to the CashFlowDiary.com podcast. Glad that you are here one more time. If this is your first time joining us, feel free to go over to our website at CashFlowDiary.com. Get your free copy of the Investing Made Easier Wholesaling book. It is a manual more than it is really a book on how to get wholesaling done in today's market conditions and environment so that you have the ability to go out there learning how to buy property and sell property using none of your own money or credit. It's totally how I started in this real estate business, and I just explained it to you completely free. So put your email in a box, you start receiving your ebook immediately, and just go through the process. And on the other end, let us know how you succeed. If this is your first time or 101st time and you haven't already, go download episode 1, listen to understand the background and format of the show. That would be great. And then as a special note, we are approaching episode number 20. If you don't know, around every 10 episodes or so, what I want to do is I just want to answer your questions. So you can go over to the website again, cashflowdiary.com. Click on the send voicemail link that appears on the right side of the browser and use your microphone or on your computer to send us a question. It'll record your voice. It'll then send us a notification so that we can hear your questions. And if you want, just, use your first name. That way we can play your question live or at least record it into the podcast. You'll hear your own voice. Everyone else will. And then they'll hear me respond to your question and we'll go from there. If you don't want to do all that, just send an email in over to questions@cashflowdiary.com. All right. Today, we're going to talk about what to do during due diligence, right? You hear that, I've got to do my due diligence. We're definitely going to, break that down. We're going to talk about when does due diligence start? What is it? Why do it? And sometimes you find stuff during due diligence. And we're definitely going to talk about what to do or what the appropriate response is. And then as a special bonus for all of you guys, I'm going to give you what I believe to be one of my most powerful and special clauses that I like to use to be able to go and help during the due diligence period or get the longest due diligence period that I have learned that you can possibly get on nearly any transaction, which has helped us more than it has hurt us time and time again. And it's a very reasonable request. One of the things that I want to make sure that we do cover on this, obviously, is the cash flow quote. And here it is. Learning is not attained by chance. It must be sought for with ardor and diligence. Ardor and diligence. And that comes to us from Abigail Adams. Now, she's from way back in 1744 to October 28th, 1818. You may recognize the last name more than you do her first name. She was the wife of John Adams, and as many of you may or may not know, the first vice president, second vice president, which would make her I love the way this is. If you look at this, I like this. She was the first second lady of the United States and the second first lady of the United States of America, and the mother of John Quincy Adams, which eventually became the sixth president of the United States. So she clearly has learned a lot just from her life. And she says learning is not chained by chance. So sometimes we feel like our accomplishments have something to do with luck, and I strongly disagree. And because learning must be sought after. You can't just hope learning happens. It's something that you seek, and if you don't seek it, then it doesn't come. One of the things that we like to do from time to time is we like to take a dip in the news. We haven't done this in a little while, and I found an interesting article that came to me by my wife, and I want to share it with you. So, if you're not familiar with the process, what it is when you take a dip in the news, the whole idea is I don't want you reviewing the news for the sake of, just reading or watching anything, because there's very little that's out there in the news that is helpful for most entrepreneurs and most of us. Here's what I'd like you to do, and this is what the letters DIP stand for. You're going to take the information from a data stage to information to interpretation. Data, information to interpretation. So it's like, okay, cool. Give me the data. Let me turn it into information. What does it mean? And then it becomes, what do I do? Interpret it. What do I do? Once I've read the data, made meaning of the data, and then interpret the data to determine what I need to do about it, then it's all about going out there, getting it done. And this is a process that I use all the time to help me make sense of why on earth am I reading something? Why on earth am I listening to a podcast in this particular case? So I want you to take this data. And here's a simple example. It was on Forbes.com. The article, I love the title. The article was, Does Pride Sabotage Your Success? It was on July 10th, 2003. I believe the author's name is Margie Worrell. Margie Worrell. So you can look up all those types of things. Does pride sabotage your success? And at the end of the day, one of the things that the author happens to bring up is the idea that, sometimes we won't take a job that's quote unquote beneath us. We have this mental attitude that if it's beneath us or we're above something. One of the things that I think is very important about that concept is understanding that just because you've had experience in one other area doesn't mean that just because you switch to a new area that you should somehow start at the top. With that in mind, one of the things that I often teach and say is that you do your first deals for experience, not profit, because occasionally we can get fooled by ourselves and saying, hey, we're worth more, we're worth this, we're worth that, I'm entitled to this, I'm entitled to that. And the truth of the matter is have we learned to create value in the space in which we're seeking income or profit from now? And if that's not the case, then maybe it is appropriate for us to start at the bottom. And I want you to go check that article out. So here's some of the questions that I want you to think about as you go through that article. So what do you do with this information? One of the questions that I was asking myself is, in what ways do I allow my own pride to limit my personal growth? If for those of you who've been following the blog, I wrote an article about how your income and personal growth are intimately tied together. So I just don't believe until you grow personally, your income won't grow. You're just not able to handle and have the level of responsibility required to make all those things work. Some of those ways I've seen others and myself allow pride to limit our personal growth is by saying things like, I don't need to read that book, or I don't need to go to that seminar, or even more famous is I have a college degree. So, or do you know how long I've been in this industry? I don't need to start there. Tell me the real stuff. I get that one a lot when it's someone looking to, switch careers, etc. And another one that tends to get in our way is, my friends will ridicule me if they find out what I'm doing. So we don't tell anybody, which completely sabotages our chance of becoming an entrepreneur, because if by default, we got to let people know. We got to use the word promote properly and let people know who we are, what we're doing today, so we can establish a new brand among them. All of those things get in the way of limiting your personal growth, and ultimately limits your income, because no one knows exactly what's going on, or you're not willing to do your first deals for experience and not profit. And so I also like to ask myself about solutions. So one of the questions was, whom do I see in my life that's an example of overcoming pride and make progress towards what they want? Because that's usually an indication that that person or individual or groups of individuals have a way of dealing with this. It's not like it's not common to them. We all have the same set of ailments. They just, manifest themselves in different ways. Some of the questions then that I begin to ask myself was, how can I mimic them? Not just do what they do. How can I mimic them? Like when you put a piece of paper on a photocopy machine, you get an exact copy or really, really close to an exact copy of exactly what you laid down, how can you mimic them in that way? What process did they use to, obtain what it is that they have? And probably the most important one, at least very important to me, is will they mentor me? I think one of the greatest things that we have gotten away from is the whole apprenticeship system. And as we continue to find our way back to the glories of self-employment and small business, et cetera, and using the apprenticeship system, easy to say, right? Then I think a lot of those things will be seen, because how long it wasn't that long ago, when you were 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, etc., you worked with your parents and you worked for experience, not profit, and you got to learn and see how all of that worked together before you actually had the need, or for a higher salary or monthly income, etc., etc. You had valuable skills that the marketplace rewarded with cash, etc., and you got to trade value for value, and it made it very, very easy for you to go out there, or at least easier, in my opinion, for you to go out there and take on the world. So, anyway, take a dip in the news. Listen to, or sorry, not listen, but read the article. Turn everything that you hear and see in that article into some usable information, possibly some questions like you heard here, and then interpret it. Decide what you're going to do now that you have this information. Don't just read it for the sake of reading it, but interpret it. Make decisions upon it. Change the direction of your life, the direction of your thinking, the direction of a friend's thought, the direction of way that you're looking at an investment, et cetera, et cetera. All right. And speaking of investments, we're going to talk now about what to do during due diligence. So, one of the things that I think about when I think about due diligence that's kind of important that most people may not see is, when does due diligence start? And for me, in my opinion, when I'm, in the middle of negotiating a transaction, etc., due diligence begins from the moment I first contact the seller. From the moment we are first in verbal two-way communication. And I was very specific about that. I said verbal two-way communication. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in person, but I do want it to be verbal two-way communication. So if you want to, use Skype or Google Hangout, or just a cell phone call, or even meet them at Starbucks or a coffee shop or something, that's fine. But from the moment you first contact the seller, in my opinion, is when the due diligence period really begins, even though on the contract it's going to say other things. The point is that that's when it begins, because part of due diligence is understanding the seller, understanding who it is that you are dealing with, and more importantly, purchasing from. This becomes even more important, especially today, especially right now, because especially if you're wanting to learn how to do deals using very little, if any, of your own money or credit. One of the things that you must become proficient at, in my opinion, is the art of seller financing. And I don't know if it's an art, if it's in science, it doesn't really matter. The point is, you must become proficient at it. And at this stage, I've been able and fortunate to have done, I don't know, a couple hundred maybe, at least 100 for sure, buy and sell transactions, and many, many more buy and hold transactions. And anytime that the seller is still involved, i.e., the seller financing, one of the things that you want to make sure that you do is that you understand who it is that you're dealing with. Because just because they're carrying the financing doesn't mean that they should. I mean, yes, it's good for you. Yes, you get it's more flexibility and all these other things, but part of the due diligence is the other person, you on the other side of the table. Now, the technical term for this could be counterparty risk. Okay. So if you've not heard that term before, sometimes you get around people who have a whole bunch of letters after their name, and they start talking about things like counterparty risk, which, is good, great. It makes it, sound all intelligent. But if you don't know what it is, and sometimes we don't want to ask the question, well, that's an issue. So counterparty risk. So remember that your counterparty, it's the party on the other side, is a risk to you. The same type of risk exists in nearly every transaction. We do it all the time. But I'm just trying to give you some names and context. So due diligence, is my opinion, it starts at the beginning. And part of that means, finding out, why do they want to sell? Or why do they want to sell to you? And, or sorry, why do they want to sell? Why would they sell to you? And why do they need to sell now? What is all of those things? All of those things are things that are risks to you that you need to understand in order to make that happen. Another piece of due diligence is just understanding what due diligence is in and of itself. Now, being an entrepreneur, we are typically naturally optimistic about the future and just saying, hey, you know what? It's going to get bigger, it's going to get better, it's going to get brighter. So let's just go for it. And we tend to ignore things. So here's the thing. I am not telling you to suddenly turn into, negative Nelly. But what I am saying is that during the due diligence process, it is your absolute sworn duty to find everything that is wrong and all the reasons to not buy it. That doesn't mean you don't want to buy it. It means it's time to ignore the fact of all the potential profit and all the potential, jobs you can create and all the potential good you can do, et cetera, et cetera. It is time to find out everything that you could be possibly afraid of. This is the best time to be the most skeptical about anyone and everything and anybody who made a promise to you in any way, shape, or form, from your vendors and your contractors to the, and depending on the size of your deal, right? You've got other people. What if you need, zoning, changes? What if you need variances with the building? And what if you've got to deal with ordinances or maybe even code enforcement? All of these things are things that you must become proficient at, depending on the size of the real estate that you're doing, etc. But you just got to be comfortable in your own skin, understanding that right now my job is to find all the reasons that you would not buy. And when I say this, one of the things that you should do, in my opinion, is to rely on others, right? You should use other people because they look at things differently. As an entrepreneur, you look at things one way. For example, I can take myself, my CFO, COO. We can all go to the same exact property. We can all look at the exact same profit and loss statement. We can all look at the exact same rent roll. And if we lined up all the tenants in a row and we all looked at them, each one of us would come away with a different perspective because our responsibilities, the way we view the world, is completely different. My operations person, she tends to look at the world from an operations standpoint, which is, completely fine. That's her job. All right. She's managing the risks. She's managing expenses. That's really what she's supposed to do. And she does a great job. So, when she looks at a building, she starts thinking about insurance costs and how to collect and how to run it and how to make sure, processes are smooth, with the management team and construction team and the construction manager and everything that goes along with it. My CFO will look at it and go, okay, who's paying late and what are the late fees and what's our contribution margin and how do we, apply that to our profit and loss statement and what is the rate at which we can amortize this debt and how quickly can we increase the income and how do we lower that expense and what are the other avenues of revenue, et cetera, et cetera. And then I just, look at it and go, wow, look at the opportunity to create jobs and do good and all the people that we're helping. And this is, culminating in a great grand vision of what it is that we get to do. Now, mind you, it's the same building. The point is we're all looking at the same building differently, and enlisting the help of others helps me temper my ability to get overly excited and emotionally involved. That's what I want you to do. Now, see, on my first deal, I also will say this as a caution. When you hire someone else or involve someone else, listen to them. On my first deal, I know this is going to sound silly, but I hired a person to do the inspection, which is great because that's, what I was told to do, get someone, do the inspection. Now, this is going to sound silly to some of you, but they did the inspection. I also pulled the, records from the county tax records, and I looked at the county tax records. I was like, cool, it's exactly what it's supposed to be: 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, et cetera, et cetera. And I moved on. And because I tend to look at real estate in a very similar fashion as a financial planner looks at a mutual fund, meaning you don't necessarily have to touch each company within the mutual fund. You don't have to see it. I see it as a stream of income. I didn't go see the house. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to go see all the properties before you buy them. I have a habit of not seeing them. That's just kind of natural. So it's really natural for me to be able to, I can put a property under contract without having to see it. Now, depending on the dollar amount and size, etc., I may go see it or I may send someone to see it. And you can adopt the same investor identity, as I call it. So in this particular case, I hadn't seen it. And what happened was the following: I had the inspection done. I did not read the inspection report. No one brought it up to my attention. Now, yes, I got the inspection. Yes, I paid for it. For some reason, the idea of, oh, I should read this didn't occur to me. I'm like, I got the tax records. Clearly, the property's there, must be fine, etc. I had sent the contractor out there. He found the property. He had a quote for the work that needed to be done. I was like, cool, everything's going to be fine. Well, turns out that it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, not a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. And I learned something very valuable. County tax records can be wrong. Now, some of you probably already knew that, and that's very basic, but I'm just saying, the point is, when you are focused on being overly optimistic, you can make a mistake. It was my first deal. I was just excited. We were still squatting Bacon property, and I'm just like, wow, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm just so amazed that this is working and people are taking me seriously. And I wrote a contract. All this other stuff was going on at the same time. And, you overlooked a tiny little thing. Now, this tiny little thing becomes an issue because what you're also doing in the due diligence process is you're trying to figure out why you're confirming what you suspect. Why do I want to buy this particular property right now, etc. So those are questions that you're answering. Confirm what you suspect. But remember, you're still looking for reasons not to buy. So what are you confirming? You're confirming that your exit strategy is viable, and you're also developing a backup plan. So fortunately, I did this part right. Even though my initial strategy was to wholesale the property, but after realizing or after closing, and then I go, oh, it's a 2-bedroom, not a 3-bedroom. We have a problem. It made it less desirable as a wholesale deal, and it became a buy and hold deal, period. Now, because I did develop a backup plan, the buy and hold part made it work. So yay, still. It wasn't what I wanted, but I had a fallback. And understand that when you put a property under contract, you should be confirming that your exit strategy is viable and question every assumption. Every assumption. You assume it's going to be worth X. Really? What makes it worth X? And who else thinks it's worth X? Because remember, value like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you may think it's worth, $40,000 a unit, but if your buyer doesn't, then you have a problem. And then you've got to come up with all the reasons why your buyer would or wouldn't see it in that particular way. All right. So hopefully you're getting some good stuff out of this. Let's take a break for a second and get over to our cash flow question. Now, let me remind you, this is what happens. For those of you that send in an email to cashflowquestion@cashflowdiary.com, cashflowquestion@cashflowdiary.com, you got to send in the answer, the correct answer to the question. You will receive a signed copy of my new book that is coming out. It is my cash flow creation system, 10 steps to creating wealth in any economy. I figure it's, kind of important, simple because, the US, as many of you know, has been going on this downhill slide. But during this downhill slide is when I began and have been able to build a real estate portfolio that helps me and my wife, and I think it's time to share how that happened. And if you just don't, you want to go ahead and just say, hey, put me on the list for the book, go over to cashflowcreationsystem.com and you can reserve your copy. But I want you to answer the question. So last week's question was, what is the process of anticipating and arranging for the disposal of an estate? The answer is, of course, estate planning. Estate planning. It's a process that, you should do early, often, and revise and keep up with either with your spouse or significant other, so that you have the ability to make sure that after you go through this process of becoming this person, that everything goes exactly where you want it to go for the reasons you want it to go there, so that someone else doesn't make the decisions because they probably don't think like you and wouldn't do what you think is best. And this is one of the best ways that we currently have of implementing these types of controls. So, this week's question, for those of you who are now eager to answer, getting an autographed copy of the book, what is the two-word phrase that some people use when they talk about inflation as it relates to the currency? I will repeat that. What is the two-word phrase that some people use when they talk about inflation as it relates to the currency? Okay, so send in your answers to cashflowquestions at cashflowdiary.com. Or if you'd like, feel free to hit the send voicemail link on our website. And what you'll be able to do is just tell us your answer. That'll be fine as well. Again, first person to get it to us, they're the ones who are going to get the copy. So make sure you send in your address as well so that we have the ability to you can't email a book. Got to send the book to you via the traditional snail mail once it comes out. Excellent. All right, so let's get back to due diligence because I'm sure you are excited to hear, what happens when you find something, and most importantly, what my special clause is. Speaking of what happens, remember the whole process of due diligence is to find something. You are looking for it. So don't put a property under contract, put real estate on contract, and be suddenly like, oh my God, I found something. You're supposed to look for it. You must find something. And in fact, I get most uncomfortable if I find nothing because then I really get skeptical. Why are you selling it? I need to know because are you trying to hide something? Have you hidden something? What is it? I need to see what it is that's there. I've got to understand why you're selling. Okay. And because there's a reason and you've got to tell me and I've got to believe you or else it's going to be difficult for me to actually get the deal done. Anyway, so what happens when you find something? Well, first of all, remember you were looking for it. So you don't quit. And here's a very simple way to temper your emotions so that you don't overreact and just go, okay, cool, it's a bad deal. Ask yourself the following questions. What makes this a problem? Like, just because you found something, is it really a problem or did you just find something? Sometimes like on an inspection report, simply, again, depending on the detail of the inspector, you'll find things like gutters are clogged. Okay. If you may not have ever dealt with a gutter because you may not actually have gutters in your geographic area, but you're like, oh my God, the gutters are clogged. The world is over. No, okay. What makes this a problem? Well, it makes it a problem because now the water might not be able to come off the roof when it rains and all this other stuff may happen. Okay, cool. Now you understand what the problem is. Then you ask yourself, well, can that be solved? Well, obviously, you just got to clean the gutters, right? In this particular case. So the answer is yes, it can be solved. Then the next two are probably the most important. Am I willing to solve it? Just because there is a problem, it doesn't mean that you must assume responsibility for it. Sometimes you may be able to renegotiate and get the seller to solve the problem, or sometimes it may be better. You just may not want to solve the problem, regardless, period. You just don't want to deal with it for whatever your reasons may be, and it's completely fine. However, what is not completely fine is saying, well, I don't want to deal with it because I don't know how to do it. Well, by default, you shouldn't. The point is that there are people for that who do know how to deal with it, and it becomes your job to go out there and find them. Then the last question is, am I the best to solve it? So to be the best to solve it doesn't mean that you actually have the skill sets or even that you've solved it before. It just means, are you willing to put the systems and structure in place that can and will permanently solve the problem? Not put a Band-Aid on it, but permanently solve the problem. And sometimes that's going to be a cost benefit analysis. Is it worth actually doing all the work and getting the capital together and spending the money to solve that particular issue? So just because you find something, don't quit. Just know that that's part of it. That's what you're supposed to do. Ask the questions, take yourself to the process, and you'll be able to come up with an answer of should you continue or should you stop. Now, before I give you the special clause, I just got to remind you again, I am not your attorney. I am not your financial planner. I'm not your CPA. I'm not any of those guys. I'm just saying but I will say this. Don't make it complicated. Trying to come up with all these tricky, sneaky clauses that people think, need to be in the contract or else, you're going to get taken advantage of. I think it's silly personally, because what ends up happening is, they take it to their attorney and they just start Xing them all out, like, hey, no. And then on the other end, if you're really serious about getting the deal done, then get the deal done. You don't need, all of these clauses. Close. That's what you said you were going to do. Do it. Unless for some reason during the inspection period or during your due diligence, something comes up and you're like, I don't want to deal with that. Like, remember, like I said, am I willing to solve it? Am I the best to solve it? So I keep it simple, subject to inspection, very, very simple. I like to inspect the property. I want to inspect the seller. I also want to inspect any financing that may stay in place or any financing that we need to negotiate. So I want to see the notes, the trust deeds, and their mortgages, etc. Here's one that I did forget on my very first deal. I forgot to inspect the escrow account, because inside this particular transaction is that the taxes and insurance were escrowed. And I got a surprise on closing when I found out that there was a negative balance. And because of the way the contract was written and the way things were done, I ended up having to come to the table to cure the negative balance. Long story, but hey, I learned from it, and now you do too. And here's probably the one line that helps me out and my team out the most, is that when we're putting in a contract, one of the things that, can become a point of contention is, how long do I have to actually do this work or inspection period? And sometimes sellers get nervous about the whole, oh, you're just trying to stall or drag me out. If you're, I need 60, 90, 20, 200 days, whatever. Well, what I have found that has cured that for me is I give you, they say, well, you got to have a 5-day inspection period. Great, no problem. 7-day, great, no problem. Doesn't bother me. The only thing I ask is, and here it is, especially when we're talking verbally, the only thing I ask is that the inspection period does not begin until you have received written notification from me that I have received from you all of the documentation that I think is necessary for me to do my due diligence. If they're agreeable to that, then there you go. Because the inspection period won't even begin until they have given me everything that I need, period. And I like that because that puts a lot of pressure on them to get everything that I'm asking for. It also puts pressure on me to make sure that I ask for everything that I could possibly need. I love that. So, and, to that effect, we've developed an Excel sheet that we tend to use to make it very, very easy for us to not forget something. And we just run off a quick checklist so that we have all of the documentation. And here's the key point. When you're sending in for the list of things that you want, just because they don't have it, you still want them to acknowledge that they don't have it. Say, we don't have it. A simple we don't have it is fine. Just because I asked for it doesn't mean you have to have it, but it does mean you have to acknowledge that I've asked for it. And more importantly, you've got to acknowledge that you don't have it. I want that documentation. So hopefully those things tend to help you as it comes to due diligence. And now you know a little bit better of what to do. In summary today, I just want to say that due diligence is a process, just like anything else. It's a new skill set. You've got to learn how to do it. And also know this, you're not going to catch everything, and that's okay. You do, however, need to catch the major things. And probably the most important thing I can say is I don't rely solely on your interpretation of all of the due diligence information that you get. I mean, we only know what we know, and we don't know what we don't know. And it's the thought that because we don't know something, because I don't know something, because you don't know something, then therefore it must not be a problem or it can't happen. Well, when we do that as investors, we get into trouble. So simply don't do that. Until next time.
Thank you for investing your time with Jay Massey and the CashFlow Diary. When you have a moment, please visit iTunes and leave a positive comment about the show. And go now to our website, CashFlowDiary.com, to take advantage of our free business building course, Cashflow Foundation. Gain the knowledge, understanding, and skill that will teach you how to never need a job again. Until next time.